Breaking right now. 47 years of silence just ended. Today, the United States and Iran sat face to face for the first time since 1979. And what they're demanding from each other could decide whether this war ends or explodes again. Something happened today in Islamabad that has not happened since 1979. The Vice President of the United States sat across a table from senior Iranian government officials in the first direct face-to-face high-level meeting between the two countries since the Islamic Revolution. 47 years, the last time American and Iranian officials engaged at this level. Jimmy Carter was in the White House. The Ayatollah Khomeini had just returned to Tehran. And the Cold War was still the defining framework of global politics. Everything that has happened in the intervening 47 years, the hostage crisis, the Iran-Iraq war, the fatwa against Salman Rushdie, the nuclear program, the proxy wars, the sanctions, the 2015 nuclear deal, Trump's withdrawal from it, the June 2025 12-day war, and the 42-day Operation Epic Fury that killed more than 3,000 people. All of it was the background to the moment when J.D. Vance walked into a conference room at the Serena Hotel in Islamabad and sat down across from Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf and Abbas Araghchi. The White House confirmed the direct nature of the talks. Iran's state-run news agency said three-party talks, including Pakistan, had begun after Iranian preconditions, including a reduction in Israeli strikes on southern Lebanon, were met. Al Jazeera's correspondent in Islamabad reported that sources close to the mediation said the two teams moved from proximate talks, meaning teams in separate rooms communicating through mediators, to direct negotiations with the Pakistani mediators also present in the room. This is the first time in the history of the Islamic Republic that an American official of this seniority has sat in the same room as Iranian officials and negotiated directly. It is happening today, and the world has not seen anything like it in almost half a century. The Iranian delegation arrived in the small hours of April 11th in a manner that was itself a political statement. Inside the aircraft were rows of empty seats with photographs and backpacks belonging to victims of the Manab school strike. A tribute to those children and a message to the world about the cost of the war that brought both delegations to this table. Ghalibaf told Pakistani media shortly after landing that Iran was ready to reach a deal if Washington offered what he described as a genuine agreement and granted Iran its rights. He also said, our experience in negotiating with the Americans has always been met with failure and broken promises. This is the man Vance is sitting across from today, a former IRGC Air Force commander who flew combat missions in the Iran-Iraq War and has spent decades in the Revolutionary Guards before transitioning to politics, describing 47 years of Iranian diplomatic experience with the United States as a history of failure and broken promises on the day he arrived to give American diplomacy one more chance. The Iranian delegation numbers 71 people in total, according to Tasnim news agency, including negotiators, experts, media representatives, and security. The 71-person delegation reflects the scale of what Iran is putting on the table. Saudi Arabia's finance minister was in Islamabad on Saturday in a show of economic support, a source familiar told AFP, reflecting the wider regional interest in the outcome. Chinese, Egyptian, Saudi, and Qatari officials were present in Islamabad to indirectly facilitate the talks. According to officials who spoke to the Associated Press on condition of anonymity, Pakistan has set up a 3-kilometer red zone around the Serena Hotel, deployed hundreds of paramilitary forces and police, positioned military assets including JF-17 and F-16 fighter jets as escort for the Iranian delegation's travel to Islamabad, and sealed key road entries into the capital. The hotel itself has been fully cleared of other guests to accommodate both delegations. Pakistan is hosting an event of a scale it has rarely, if ever, seen before. And it is doing so because the outcome of these talks will define the country's international standing for a decade. Vance's specific role in reaching this moment is documented more clearly now than at any point in the war. A senior Pakistani source told CNN that Vance has been key in bringing about the talks taking place in Islamabad, praising his role in pushing the United States and Iran toward a diplomatic solution. The Japan Times described Trump counting on Vance to be his closer, noting that if Vance succeeds, it could help burnish his credibility on the world stage ahead of a possible White House run in 2028. A bike and and that failure could damage his standing and saddle him with a chunk of the blame. Vance himself, speaking to reporters before departing Joint Base Andrews on Friday, said he expected the negotiations to be positive, but warned that if Iran tries to play us, the negotiating team is not that receptive. These are the stakes Vance brought to Islamabad. Not just the end of a 6-week war, his own political future, his 2028 presidential viability, and his place in the historical record as the first American leader to crack what 47 years of sanctions, covert operations, proxy wars, and direct military strikes could not crack. The 4 Iranian non-negotiable conditions that Tasnim reported before the talks began define exactly what Iran is asking for and why each one is in direct conflict with at least one American red line. First, full sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz. Iran wants formal recognition of its control over the waterway that carries 20% of global oil and gas. Trump has said the strait must be opened completely, immediately, and safely, without limitations and without tolls. He said on Thursday that Iran was doing a very poor job, dishonorable some would say, of allowing oil to go through the strait, and that this is not the agreement we have. These are not compatible positions. The strait that the global economy needs open and the strait that Iran says it has full sovereignty over cannot both be fully open and fully Iranian-controlled simultaneously without a legal framework that has never existed before, and that every shipping company and oil-importing nation will need to evaluate before resuming normal traffic. Second, complete war reparations by the aggressor. Iran wants financial compensation for 42 days of strikes that killed at least 3,000 people, damaged or destroyed hospitals, universities, petrochemical plants, bridges, refineries, and residential neighborhoods across a country of 93 million people. The United States and Israel launched the war. Iran considers them the aggressors. The American position is that Operation Epic Fury was a legitimate military action to prevent Iranian nuclear weapons. Trump has not publicly agreed to any reparations. The 15-point American proposal, as understood from official descriptions, does not include war reparations. The gap between Iran's demand for full compensation and the American position of no reparations is not a gap that can be closed by compromise without one side fundamentally changing its public characterization of who started the war and why. Third, unconditional release of blocked assets. Iran wants the approximately $6 billion in frozen assets released without preconditions. The White House denied on Saturday that Washington had agreed to release frozen Iranian assets in Qatar and foreign banks to ensure the opening of the Strait of Hormuz, contradicting earlier reports that asset release had been used as a confidence-building measure to get the talks started. Qatar claimed it still has the $6 billion intact, which the U.S. Treasury would need to permit to be released. This is a financial instrument that is directly connected to the Hormuz reopening because Iran's Foreign Minister Araghchi told reporters in Islamabad that Iran's position on Hormuz was directly tied to the ceasefire being honored across all fronts, including Lebanon. You cannot solve Hormuz without solving Lebanon. You cannot solve Lebanon without addressing Israel's operations. You cannot address Israel's operations without the United States putting pressure on Netanyahu that it has publicly refused to apply. And you cannot close the assets question without Treasury authorization that has not been given. Fourth and most fundamental, a durable ceasefire across the entire West Asia region. This is Iran's comprehensive demand, not just a halt to American strikes on Iranian territory, but an end to Israeli operations in Lebanon, a halt to all attacks on Hezbollah, and a regional framework that covers all theaters simultaneously. This is the demand that Israel has explicitly rejected. Netanyahu said the ceasefire does not include Lebanon. Vance said Lebanon has nothing to do with Iran, a characterization that Iran's foreign minister called the central contradiction of the entire negotiation. Araghchi posted on X that the U.S. must choose between ceasefire and continued war via Israel and cannot have both. Iran arrived in Islamabad holding this position and the Hormuz key simultaneously. Every day, the strait is not fully open. Oil prices stay elevated. American gas prices stay above $4, and the political pressure on Trump from domestic consumers and Republican senators compounds. The nuclear question that runs underneath all four Iranian preconditions is the one that Vance is most specifically tasked with resolving, and the one on which both sides' public positions are furthest apart. Trump said on Friday that the main objective to end the war was to prevent Iran from having any nuclear capabilities. No nuclear weapon, he said. And he specifically told AFP that Iran's uranium stockpile would be perfectly taken care of, or I wouldn't have settled. Tito made the American position operationally specific in recent days. Iran's enrichment facilities at Natanz, Forda, and Isfahan must be dismantled, and there must be no weaponization. He said that if the next round of talks fails to yield results, they will end and the U.S. will pursue alternative options. This is a dismantlement demand, not a monitoring demand, not a limitation demand, not a suspension demand. Dismantlement. Iran's position has been consistent across every version of its communications. The Farsi ceasefire document included acceptance of enrichment. Iran's publicly released 10-point proposal includes the right to nuclear enrichment. Iran's atomic energy chief said any attempt to limit enrichment would fail. And Republican Senators Lindsey Graham and Tom Cotton warned that any future deal would require Senate approval, and that such approval would only be possible if Iran fully dismantled its enrichment capabilities. Graham said he was not interested in Iran saving face. Tom Cotton said a 123 agreement imposing strict safeguards and requiring full dismantlement before any cooperation would need to be part of any deal. These are the domestic American political constraints that define the minimum Vance can accept and still get a deal through the Senate. Iran knows this. Iran's strategy for 47 years has been to prevent exactly the Senate ratification process that would make any American commitment durable, because Iran's 47 years of experience, as Ghalib stated on arrival, has been American commitments that do not hold. The global economic stakes of what is happening in the Serena Hotel today are documented in the numbers that are still accumulating damage. The head of Airports Council International Europe, Olivier Janowicz, warned the European Union in a letter obtained by the Associated Press that a systemic jet fuel shortage could come within 3 weeks because of the Strait of Hormuz blockage. He said the crunch could impact the summer travel season and significantly harm the European economy. Oil prices have climbed again after the brief ceasefire announcement drop. The Hormuz is still not fully open. Lloyd's List records minimal traffic. The shipping industry, including Maersk, the world's largest container shipping company, says the ceasefire announcement does not provide sufficient certainty to resume normal operations. Europe faces jet fuel shortages in 3 weeks. The summer travel season, the most economically significant aviation period of the year, begins in 60 days. These are the countdown clocks running simultaneously with the peace talks in Islamabad. The AP reported that in Thran, residents described themselves as skeptical yet hopeful about the talks after weeks of airstrikes left destruction across their country. 62-year-old Amir Razai Far told AP, "Peace alone is not enough for our country because we've been hit very hard. There have been huge costs." This is the civilian voice underneath the military and diplomatic language of the Islamabad talks. 3,000 Iranians killed, nearly 2,000 killed in Lebanon, 23 killed in Israel, 13 Americans killed, 365 Americans wounded, infrastructure damage across 6 Middle Eastern countries. And in Thran, an ordinary citizen saying that even if the talks succeed and the war formally ends, peace alone is not enough. The Islamabad talks are the test of whether 6 weeks of war, 47 years of hostility, and 3,000 deaths have produced the conditions for something that all previous diplomacy could not produce. The Iran nuclear deal of 2015 took 18 months to negotiate and was abandoned 3 years later. The February 2026 Geneva talks that immediately preceded this war collapsed within days of their final session. The Muscat talks of 2025 produced a year of negotiation without resolution. The war that followed those talks killed thousands. And now Vance and Ghalibaf are in the same room today in Islamabad with 2 weeks of ceasefire window, 4 Iranian non-negotiable preconditions, 5 American red lines, Lebanese civilians being killed while the talks proceed, a Hormuz that is not fully open, and a global economy watching the outcome in real time. The Iranian aircraft that flew the 71-person delegation to Islamabad was escorted by Pakistani Air Force jets. The seats on that aircraft were lined with photographs of children killed in the Manab school strike. The conference room is in a sealed luxury hotel in a sealed diplomatic district in a capital that has declared public holidays to manage the logistics of hosting the two sides. The world's largest meeting room is watching, and the two men inside it have 47 years of broken promises between them and 2 weeks to produce something that holds. Subscribe, enable notifications, share this with anyone who wants to understand what is actually being negotiated in Islamabad versus what the official statements from both sides describe. These are the most consequential hours for the Middle East since the 2000 bevisar we nuclear deal, and we are covering every verified development as it happens. Drop your answers to the 3 questions below. Every comment is read and the best analysis gets featured. Question A. Iran arrived in Islamabad with photographs of children killed in the Manab school strike lining the seats of their aircraft, and with their lead negotiator saying 47 years of American promises have always been met with failure and broken promises. Vance arrived with a warning that if Iran tries to play the U.S., the negotiating team is not that receptive. These are the psychological starting points of the most important bilateral negotiation in 47 years. Which side's starting psychological position is more consistent with producing a deal? And what does the research on negotiations between adversaries with deep mistrust say about what has to happen in the first session for talks to have any chance of succeeding? Question B. Iran's 4 non-negotiable preconditions include full sovereignty over Hormuz, war reparations, asset release, and a regional ceasefire, including Lebanon. The U.S. says none of these are agreed. Iran's Farsi documents include nuclear enrichment acceptance. The U.S. says no enrichment, period. Europe faces jet fuel shortages in 3 weeks. Oil is still above 95. Trump's approval is 35%. Vance needs a deal that can pass the Senate and that Graham and Cotton can call denuclearization. Which side's domestic political constraints are more binding? And does the side with the more binding constraints have more leverage or less? Question C. The Iranian aircraft flew into Islamabad escorted by Pakistani Air Force jets. China, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar sent officials to facilitate indirectly. Pakistan's defense minister had to delete a post calling Israel a cancerous state that should burn in hell on the same day the talks he brokered began. The IRGC is not in the room. Netanyahu is bombing Lebanon while the talks proceed. Trump said the shooting starts if talks fail. If the Islamabad talks produce a framework document that both sides signed today, what are the 3 most likely reasons it will not be implemented by either side within 30 min? I trained den treached.